Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. You may notice I am not in my normal filming location. I am at my parents' house in the living room where we have a lovely Christmas tree. You may also notice I am not wearing one of my regular fancy booktube hats, but a substitute that I keep here at my parents' house for when I film videos here. But in this festive setting, this festive time of year, I thought it was high time for me to do my anticipated sci-fi and fantasy releases of 2019 video. This is only the second year that I've done an anticipated releases video on my channel, but last year's video worked for me well enough that I am following the same format. Basically, for a book to be on this list, I've decided it has to have a title, a book description of some sort that gives me some idea of what to expect, and a release date. No, expected publication 2019 or like expected publication month of 2019. And I know that release dates are subject to change. Books are subject to be canceled outright, pushed to further years. That is the perpetual disclaimer of all anticipated releases videos. I also reserve the right to be wrong in any of my research on any of these books. Please forgive me if I am. But that's what I'm going by. Most of the information I've got comes from Goodreads, although where possible I've tried to confirm with publishers' websites. And I think that all of the release dates I'm going to be mentioning here are going to be the American release dates for these books, because I am in America and those are the dates that are relevant to me. Of course, the sort of requisite disclaimer that needs to go on any anticipated releases for a year video posted at the end of the prior year is that at this point in the year there are many things for the coming year that just haven't been announced yet, especially in the second half of the year. Of course, fall is usually, a huge book release season, and most of those things are a mystery to us so far. We don't know about them. I also want to be sure to impart to you that a book's appearance on this list does not guarantee that I will actually read and review it in the coming year or at all. I am bad at these things. Not only am I bad at these things, but there are a heck of a lot of books on this list. So I will be going in chronological order of scheduled release date. The first books that I have on this list are both for January 8th. And the first is The Winter of the Witch by Katherine Arden, which is the third and final book in the Winter Night trilogy, which started with The Bear and the Nightingale and continued with The Girl and the Tower. And this is going to be from Del Rey. This is fairy tale inspired historical fantasy set in 14th century Russia. I know a lot of people have been following this series, and this is a highly anticipated release for many. I actually have an arc of this, and I am hoping to read it by the time it's released, possibly by the end of this month. Now, this is the only book on this list that was also in my anticipated releases video last year, because this was initially scheduled for 2018 publication and then it got pushed back to 2019. The second book on this list is also something that has apparently been pushed back. I had thought this had already been published, and then I was looking for it in stores and not finding it, wondering what the heck had happened, and I checked the release date and it's apparently been pushed back to January 8th. That's what happened. And that is Kat Howard's short story collection, A Cathedral of Myth and Bone, which is from Saga Press. Kat Howard has 2 novels out at this point. I have read Roses and Rot. I have not read An Unkindness of Magicians. I have actually been taken more with her short fiction that I've read, though, than I have with the one book of hers that I've read, or even with like the description or reviews that I've seen of her second book. So I think that this story collection is something I am definitely going to want to get my hands on. She's done like some very lyrical, very mythic fantasy writing, stuff like set in the real world, and that is very much my thing. Next, on January 15th, we have possibly the only middle grade book that I have on this list right now, and that is Dragon Pearl by Yoon Lee, which is from Rick Riordan Presents. Yoon Lee is, of course, the author of an adult military sci-fi series, The Machineries of Empire, Nine Fox Gambit, and its sequels, which I have read, and which holds the rare distinction of being one of the few military sci-fi stories I've actually kind of enjoyed. This seems to be like real space fantasy with, I think, Korean mythology and folklore in a sci-fi setting. There are several things that make me very interested in this. First of all, I believe it is a standalone, and I don't feel like I see enough strong middle grade fantasy standalones. At least it's planned to be a standalone at this point in time. And also, I don't see a lot of good middle grade sci-fi being published. And even though this is definitely looking like fantasy in space, it certainly has enough of those sci-fi elements that I would love to see being written into more middle grade stories. The last book I have on this list for January is going to be A Labyrinth of Science and Sorcery by Curtis Craddock from Tor. This is the second book in a series called The Risen Kingdoms, the first book of which was An Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors. I believe An Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors was a 2017 release. I know I did review it when it came out. I will link my review for you. And I remember thinking that it was just a really underhyped book at the time that should have gotten more attention. It's set in sort of a steampunk-ish fantasy world with very much the feeling of like 17th century France and Spain, but like in a world where the continents are all like these floating continents on a planet that's potentially some sort of gas giant. The story was full of intrigue and adventure, it had really likable main characters, and it was a world that I wanted to read more books set in. Now, I felt like An Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors worked really well as a standalone, and I had sort of thought that the rest of the series might be focusing on different characters set in different parts of this world, but this does look like it's a continuation of Isabel's story from the first book. But anyways, this is a sequel I am looking forward to, and it is a series I am reading. Moving on to February, on the 5th, we have another short story collection from an author whose short fiction I really like, and that is Snow White Learns Witchcraft by Theodora Goss from Mythic Delirium. Now, Theodora Goss told me that this book would be happening when I went to her signing at Worldcon over the summer before it had been announced. So I have been waiting for this book with bated breath, but this is a collection of her fairy tale inspired short fiction. I love her fairy tale inspired short fiction. I am so pumped. On February 12th, we have The City in the Middle of the Night by Charlie Jane Anders from Tor. This is her sophomore novel following All the Birds in the Sky, and this seems like it may be more of a really like far future sci-fi than that book was. All the Birds in the Sky was very near future sci-fi with fantasy elements. I do not know whether this book is going to have fantastical elements or not, but I know it is set on a planet where one side is always day and the other side is always night. In this sort of scenario, one might imagine that the sort of border between the two around the planet would be the only inhabitable areas due to temperature, but this is apparently about a character who gets sent to the dark side of her planet and has to survive there. Next, I have the first Tor.com novella to make an appearance on this list. On February 19th, we are going to be getting The Haunting of Tramcar 015 by P. Djèlí Clark. This is a novella set in the same steampunk Cairo alt history world that this author's short story, A Dead Djinn in Cairo, was set in, and I remember really liking the world building in A Dead Djinn in Cairo. There is some serious fascinating alt history going on here, if I remember correctly. A Dead Djinn in Cairo was also a sort of a mystery story that developed into something much bigger than a mystery story, and this looks like it might be kind of the same in that regard. Next, on February 26th, I have The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie, which is the first fantasy novel from an author who is known for her science fiction books, which I am ashamed that I have not read yet. This, by the way, is going to be published by Orbit. So I have been really slow on the uptake with Leckie's Imperial Roch series. I do own the first one, but I am just not big on military sci-fi, and that is military sci-fi that I intend to give a try at some point, but I'm just not always in the mood for it. But I have seen Leckie speak at actually a couple of different events over the past year, and I have been really impressed with her as a person and as, you know, an event participant, and that has only reinforced the notion that I really need to read her books. So it might be that Raven Tower being her first fantasy novel will actually be the place that I start in with Leckie. And it occurs to me as I'm filming this, I actually don't know if this book is going to be a standalone or the first book in a series, so if you know that, please comment down below and let me know. Moving on to March. On the 12th, we have The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. This is going to be published by Grove Press. And G. Willow Wilson is another author who's done some really acclaimed stuff that's really popular and whose work I have not read, and this is almost definitely going to be the first thing of hers that I end up reading. And this appeals to me specifically because it is historical fantasy, which is one of those things that is just my jam. This is apparently focusing on Muslim history in the Iberian Peninsula around the time of the Spanish Inquisition, which is history that I personally am just not familiar with at all, so this is going to be fascinating for me. On March 19th, we have another short story collection, and I am going to have to start reading short story collections way faster than I'm doing right now, because there are a lot of really good looking ones coming out this year, and I am so behind on all the ones I've already got. But this one is Sooner or Later Everything Falls into the Sea by Sarah Pinsker, published by Small Beer Press. Sarah Pinsker is an author I was completely unfamiliar with until I started doing Hugo reading this past year. And she had two different stories on the Hugo ballot, and I really loved both of them. The first one that I read, I actually read in time to nominate it for the Hugos, and that was the novelette Wind Will Rove. And then the second thing she had on the Hugo shortlist was actually a novella called And Then There Were N-1. I think both of those are available to read for free online, so I'll link them. I should link some stories for some of the other short fiction authors I've mentioned in this video too. I'll try to do that. But anyways, this is Sarah Pinsker's new short story collection, and both of those things I've read of hers were just so inventive and heartfelt that I feel like I want to be keeping up with some of her work. And that was actually only the first of two books I had on my list for the same release day, March 19th. The other one is The Deepest Blue by Sarah Beth Durst, which is a standalone novel that's going to be set in the same world as her Queens of Renthia trilogy, which I have read and enjoyed. They are lighter, epic fantasy, shorter, quicker reads, very character-driven. The kingdom, or I guess possibly queendom or nation, since these are nations that are only ruled by queens, that this particular book is set in is one that seems really, really different from the ones that the previous trilogy focused on, so I think it's gonna be a fun time. On the 26th of March is the second Tor.com novella on this list, and this is Miranda in Milan by Katherine Duckett. As the title suggests, this is in fact a sequel story to The Tempest. It is apparently queer. Rachel from Colonnati has already read an advance copy of this and she really liked it. I'm sold. Moving on to April. April 16th is the release date for Amnesty by Lara Elena Donnelly, which is the third and final book in the Amberlow dossier. I read the book description of this and had like a jaw-drop moment because it looks like this is not going in the direction that I would have assumed that a conclusion to this series would have been going. It's going somewhere else that is potentially, to me, more exciting, and I am pumped. These books are set in a non-magical fantasy world based on the 1930s, following the rise and apparently the fall of a fascist regime. So yeah, in case you can't tell, I am ready for this. On April 30th, we have Lady Hotspur by Tessa Gratton, which is the second Shakespearean-based book on this list. This is another epic fantasy Shakespeare retelling set in the same world of the Queens of Innisleer, which I've just recently reviewed, so I'll link that review for you. But even though this is set in the same world of the Queens of Innisleer, my understanding is that it's, you know, set in a different time period and doesn't necessarily connect all that directly. But this is, as the title would suggest, a Henry IV retelling. Not only that, a seriously gender-swapped Henry IV retelling, potentially focusing on Hotspur. Given that it's focusing on Hotspur, I'm sort of assuming that this is going to be a retelling primarily of Henry IV Part 1, but it could surprise me and keep going with the source material and pick up with Part 2 and Henry V. I really don't know what the range of source material is for this book. Regardless, we will learn on April 30th. I have nothing for May right now. Sadness and emptiness and loneliness. There will be books in May, I just don't know about them yet. In June though, on June 4th, we are going to be getting Magic for Liars by Sarah Gailey. This is going to be Sarah Gailey's first novel, but they of course wrote the American Hippo duology River of Teeth and Taste of Marrow, those being alt history Western novellas. This looks like very quirky contemporary fantasy. I think this is about a character who is a private investigator and the non-magical one of two sisters. Anyways, I'm very curious to see what this is going to be like. I've also only got one book for July. The release date is going to be July 16th, and this is a book that I'm not quite sure what to expect from because the book description is rather vague, and that is This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is a novella from Saga Press, co-written by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Mohtar. I have not read any of Max Gladstone's very highly acclaimed novels, but I have enjoyed short fiction from both of these authors before. This seems to be about some sort of time travel correspondence between two secret agents. Presumably there is a time war. It has this intriguing cover. I'm intrigued. I may not usually gravitate towards time travel fiction, but I'm intrigued. Moving on to August, on August 6th, we've got one that I'm very excited about. It has a gorgeous cover, and that is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. And this is 1920s historical fantasy set in Mexico with Mayan mythology. Oh, I can't wait. Yes, it's midnight. I'm still filming and it's midnight. Is it time for me to flee the ball and leave my hat on the stairs? The second August release I have is scheduled for August 20th, and this is a book called Turning Darkness into Light by Marie Brennan, who is of course the author of the Memoirs of Lady Trent series, and this is a sequel book, standalone sequel book, set in the same world that apparently follows the main character Isabella's granddaughter and her own adventures in academia in a world that is presumably somewhat changed socially from her grandmother's generation. I still have 2 more of the Lady Trent books that I have to read before I can get to this one. So this is released on August 20th. My goal is to finish the original series by August 20th by the time this comes out. Will I succeed? We'll see. September and October are lonely little months that I don't have anything penciled in for yet. We're getting late in the year, but surprise, surprise, I have 2 things for November. And these are going to be my last 2 books in the video because I also don't have anything in here for December. That would be a long shot. But first, on November 5th, is what I'm guessing will be one of the most anticipated books on BookTube this year, and that is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is apparently not the final cover, this is a placeholder cover, but this is the second book, the long-anticipated second book by Erin Morgenstern, author of The Night Circus, which I loved just as much as everyone else did. But this, like, apparently has a magical underground library or something. Oh, I want it. And then the last book I've got on this list has neither a cover nor a placeholder cover yet, but it's scheduled to be published on November 19th from Tor Teen. And this is a book called Catfishing on Catnet by Naomi Kritzer. If this is ringing bells for you, it may be because, like me, you read Naomi Kritzer's short story from 2015, Cat Pictures Please, which won the Hugo Award. And yes, this is apparently a YA novel based on that story and its premise. I will link the short story below. It was quite entertaining and heartfelt, about an artificial intelligence of a search engine that, you know, grows self-awareness and becomes obsessed with pictures of other people's cats like you do, starts meddling around with social media online and becomes very invested in, you know, assisting the lives of people who post cute pictures of their cats. This is apparently about a teenage character who is a member of an online forum, Catnet, of which this AI character is secretly the moderator. No one knows that this person is an artificial intelligence. And I guess it's about this relationship between this teenage girl and this AI, and what happens when the AI's true nature is publicly revealed. You have no idea how curious I am about this book. It sounds like, you know, a really different type of YA sci-fi. November, I will be waiting. So that's it. That's my anticipated releases for 2019. My hope is that some of these will have been new to you and may have caught your interest. Do let me know in the comments if you found something new to get excited for here. Also, let me know if there are any upcoming sci-fi and fantasy releases for 2019 that you are super pumped about that you think I missed. As I've said, I may not myself get around to reading all of these books, but if I help some of you find things that you are really excited for now, then my job is done here. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.